Nintendo is often scrutinized for never releasing new IPs, or relying solely on their flagships such as Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon, despite releasing several franchises over the recent years like Xenoblade Chronicles, Pushmo, Rhythm Heaven, and even the widely popular Wii series, just to name a few. Most of these series often get placed into one of two categories though. The "oh, it's a spin-off," or "it's too niche to count," or on the other end, it's not developed exclusively by Nintendo EPD, and therefore they don't count either. This narrative would carry on for years, but little did everyone know that there was a game that was about to change everything. A game that not even Nintendo expected to grow as it did. A game that, despite being in its infancy, would kickstart a franchise that would soon become one of Nintendo's fastest growing franchises to date. That game was Splatoon. But what was it about Splatoon that resulted in its explosive rise? How, in just 8 years, has it become one of the best-selling Nintendo franchises, with its recent games selling well over 10 million copies each? And how has it become a franchise that many consider has the potential of reaching the other pillars of Nintendo? Today, we'll look to answer those questions, all while witnessing the explosive rise of Splatoon. Following the commercial success of the Nintendo Wii back in the late 2000s, Nintendo would start off the new generation with a bang. The only problem? This bang was directed at themselves, with the release of the Wii U in 2012. Now, this video isn't going to address the myriad of reasons why the Wii U ended up failing in the eyes of fans, but I mention it as it would certainly have a significant impact on the many stellar games released for the console. One of these games was a project that at the time was being developed by Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development in late 2013. The game would be overseen by Hisashi Nogami, the longtime director of the Animal Crossing series. After working through over 70 game ideas, the team eventually settled on the idea of blocks of black and white tofu, which had noses that sprayed ink. The game would have these blocks of tofu spray the ink onto a featureless arena in a sort of turf war format. I think you can see where I'm going with this. The game at the time featured a top-down view and allowed for the tofu blocks to blend in with the splattered turf. The team realized quite quickly, however, that these characters presented a variety of problems and chose to shift them towards a more humanoid appearance. At first, a rabbit design was chosen, before getting completely shut down by developers. These designs were then later scrapped in favor of squids, as they made more relative sense in regard to the use of ink. The team would consider a squid-human hybrid before deciding on a humanoid inkling that had the ability to turn into a squid. We now fast forward a year to E3 2014, where the game was officially revealed as Splatoon, as well as having a playable demo that people could test out. The demo featured just one map, a pre-release version of Urchin Underpass, and the player had the impossible choice of one weapon set, which included the ink shot, splatter bombs, and the super weapon. Now these would be renamed to the Splattershot, Splat Bombs, and Inkzooka respectively upon the game's official release. But what was most surprising about this whole reveal was the fact that the game was a third-person shooter, which if you're a Nintendo fan, you know isn't their particular format of choice when it comes to their games. But Nintendo didn't just copy the format of other big shooters, which at that point could hardly be differentiated from each other. Like seriously, are all these games COD, or are none of them COD? Nintendo decided to differentiate itself by not only shifting the gameplay of shooters, but also the objective. In this demo, while it was a 4v4 team battle, the goal wasn't just some cheap deathmatch where the number of kills determined the winner. The outcome would be decided based on the proportion of ink that had been sprayed on the ground by each team. While you could engage in gunfights with enemies and eliminate them, it wasn't the sole purpose, and if anything, just allowed your team more space and time to fill up the turf with more of your ink. Another core feature demonstrated was the ability to turn into a squid and dive into the ink that had been sprayed onto the floor and even up walls. While in squid form, you could move twice as fast, allowing you to travel at much quicker speeds should your team hold a large proportion of the ink. This allowed for a variety of different playstyles and was much more newbie friendly for the more casual audience. Initial reactions to this demo were relatively positive, but there certainly was some confusion as to what the series was trying to be. Even so, anticipation built for the release of a new Nintendo IP, because apparently no one considered the ones I'd mentioned before as a new one. But regardless, fans would have to wait another 10 months before the game would be released, as at the time, the team had only completed 10% of the game. Splatoon would release in May 2015 and would feature both a single-player story mode as well as the main draw of the game, the multiplayer modes. The single-player termed Hero Mode was essentially a tutorial bundled up into fun interactive levels. These levels would not only involve a short story but introduce mechanics such as movement and the many properties of ink that the player could use. All in all, it helped players settle into the aspects of gameplay and combat that they would experience in multiplayer. The online multiplayer mode would release with 5 maps: Arowana Mall, Blackbelly Skate Park, Salt Spray Rig, Urchin Underpass, and Walleye Warehouse. And I know what you're thinking. Whoa, hold on. Only 5 maps? Dang, this game's trash. Call of Duty releases with 10 to 15 maps. Wait, you're not thinking that? Well, what Splatoon did have was free content updates that were released frequently throughout the game's lifespan. These would add maps, weapons, equipment, and other events that players could participate in. And that brings us to another feature that was crucial in Splatoon's explosive rise, the addition of Splatfests. These were special events that periodically occurred for a limited time and had players join a team after answering a certain question. These questions would often range from tame things like cats vs dogs to somewhat more controversial topics like Pokemon Red vs Pokemon Blue. These Splatfests were also separated by region, and the themes would reflect the particular region of that Splatfest. So for example, in Japan, players would have to choose between a red fox or a green tanuki, whereas in Oceania, players would be asked whether or not they were subscribed to this channel.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
This added a sense of community within the game, as you were fighting together as a collective. In a similar sense, the hub world, Inkopolis Plaza, would feature the sprites of recent players that you had faced and teamed up with in multiplayer battles, making it feel like a friendly little city and area that you were a part of. Now onto the gameplay, and if you've never played Splatoon and you're watching this video thinking, Jesus Christ, what the fuck is going on? But don't worry, it's honestly not as complex as it looks. As I previously stated, the game does a very good job of teaching the player the functionality of the game during its tutorial in the hero mode. Additionally, the game allows for many different playstyles. Players have the choice between 5 main weapon types: the shooters, which were the standard guns able to fire small blobs of ink in quick succession, rollers that could be pushed along the ground leaving a trail of ink and could also fling ink, chargers acted as the game's snipers and needed to be charged before instantly splatting opponents at far distances, sloshes, which were single-shot bucket-like weapons that hurled a large amount of ink in an arc, and splatlings, miniguns that had a high fire rate and considerable range. This, as you can imagine, offered a tremendous amount of variability and accommodated pretty much all playstyles. If you enjoyed combat, you'd be more inclined to splat enemies, whereas if you weren't as confident, you could easily contribute a lot to your team just by inking the turf. This combination leads to an environment where no one feels left out, and is a lot more casual in a sense than other competitive shooters like Fortnite or Apex Legends that require hours of practice before becoming even slightly decent. This isn't to say Splatoon is just for casuals though. The game features multiple competitive ranked modes, which have resulted in the game's own esports league. I mean, now it just needs some prize money to support it. The ensuing chaos caused by all the inking would often result in quite the array of colours, which many adored and considered an essential artistic touch that made the game unique.
Oh my god.
This most likely played a massive part in the amounts of merch produced and advertised in Japan. Baby inklings would dangle from backpacks, Squid Girl stickers adorned pencil cases, and pretty much every convenience store advertised raffle for figurines, coffee cups, and Splatoon branded bags. It was as if Pokemon had been rebranded. All of this would ultimately result in the game selling close to 5 million copies, which might I remind you was on a console that struggled to sell over 13 million units as a whole. This would cement Splatoon as the 6th best selling game on the console, and while that may not seem too impressive, the games it was competing against were for some of the biggest franchises such as Mario Kart, Super Mario 3D World, and Super Smash Bros. To help put this more into perspective, Splatoon was also released 2 to 3 years after some of these other games, meaning that if they had released at the same time, it's more than likely that Splatoon would rank much higher in the sales. Regardless, for a completely new IP, this was very respectable, and Nintendo, after seeing this, wasted no time, as within months, development had begun on the next game in the franchise. The following year, in 2016, the sequel had already been teased during a reveal trailer for the Nintendo Switch. Splatoon 2 would officially release in 2017, barely 2 years after the first Splatoon. The game would feature a lot of what made the first game so special, but included numerous additions and a level of polish to the game. The game would release with 8 maps this time, and go on to include 23 stages in total, with 9 returning from the original Splatoon. During Splatfest, a special stage called Shift Station would be added to the rotation. The layout of this stage would change depending on each Splatfest, and added another form of variability. Splatoon 2 would add new weapon types such as dualies, allowing the player to dodge roll, as well as brellas, which were shotgun-like weapons that also had deployable shields. Numerous other special weapons and gear items would also be added. In addition to this, a new co-op mode would be added called Salmon Run, which had players complete 3 waves in which they had to collect power eggs and golden eggs while defeating salmonids before depositing the eggs into the egg basket. For some, the game wouldn't do enough to change up the formula, and many considered the game to be a Splatoon 1.5 instead of a true sequel. The game would, however, receive DLC in the form of the Octo expansion. This expansion heavily fleshed out the lackluster story mode, adding 80 new levels to the mix. While not an initial success, Splatoon would quietly power its way to over 13 million units sold, making it the 14th best-selling title on the Switch, an incredible feat for a franchise that was only 2 games into its existence. And while Splatoon 2 didn't initially explode in popularity, it certainly paved the way for the latest game, which certainly did. In an interview with the weekly Famitsu magazine in 2017, series producer Hisashi Nogami stated that the game had solely focused on the Octo expansion and further updates for Splatoon 2, meaning that production for Splatoon 3 had not started as of July 2019. Unlike the fast turnover between Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2, it would seem that fans would have to wait a while for the latest installment into the series. Slowly but surely, however, the reveal of Splatoon 3 would come to light. On the 17th of February 2021, Splatoon 3 would be announced during a Nintendo Direct. Further information regarding new special weapons, stages, and music would be revealed on the 23rd of September 2021. And on the very first day of 2022, Splatoon's Japanese Twitter account posted a tweet. The tweet included a video of an Inkling performing a victory pose along with a jingle, while 2022 was being written in ink. These teasers would continue up until the release of Splatoon 3 in September of 2022. And just like that, Splatoon would make history. Within 3 days of release, it had already sold 3.45 million copies in Japan alone, making it the fastest selling Nintendo Switch release ever. For context, this record was previously held by Animal Crossing: New Horizons, which sold an estimated 2.5 million copies within its first 3 days, including digital downloads. Before that, it was Pokemon Sword and Shield, with 1.3 million copies in 3 days. Splatoon 3 managed to blow both of these highly established franchises out of the water. As of the current day, Splatoon 3 has sold well over 10 million copies, and will most likely dwarf these numbers in the coming years. Splatoon 3 added numerous features to the series. Tricolor Turf Wars were introduced in Splatoon 3, where as you might have guessed, instead of 2 teams vying over turf, there were now 3. Salmon Run was also updated to become Salmon Run Next Wave, which unlike its predecessor could now be played at any time. The game mode would feature new boss salmonids, stages, mechanics such as egg throws, king salmonids, and big runs. The game would feature 2 new main weapons, the Stringer, which when charged would fire 3 strings of ink simultaneously, as well as the Splatana, which fires slashes of ink and can perform a charged slash to deal high damage. Various new sub-weapons and special weapons were also introduced. The story mode would introduce a small fry nicknamed Little Buddy.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
From the low barrier of entry, allowing for all and every playstyle, to the addictive and unique gameplay that had players coming back for more, to the seemingly endless amounts of customization, and the undeniable soundtrack that has resulted in real-world concerts that draw crowds of fans. It's not hard to understand how this franchise has managed to take over in such a short time period. Now, if the obscene amount of merchandise and the crazy sale records aren't enough to convince you of this franchise's potential and explosive growth, then what about this? Yeah, that's right. They even have their own Baskin & Robbins ice cream, which for whatever reason only ever got released in Japan. In an age when Nintendo would frequently get chewed out for releasing the same franchises over and over, Splatoon has managed to turn the narrative on its head. In just 8 years, the franchise has managed to not only establish itself as a prominent series with endless potential, but also give rise to the possibility and the idea that other often ignored franchises may also be worth investing in. The Splatoon franchise is only going to grow from here, and its explosive rise could help it reach levels far beyond anything Nintendo had ever planned.